Chapter 98. Overlooking all the mountains below. The excitement seemed to have come to an end just like that. However, in the system, the sound of harvested emotion points continued for quite some time, and Yunjing clearly felt that this time was different from before. In the past, she would gain a large amount of emotion points instantly, but it wouldn't last very long. Mainly because those incidents didn't have much to do with other people. Their emotions might have fluctuated at the time, but afterward, it was at most just idle gossip. Not enough to stir strong emotional waves. But this time, what Yunjing was about to do was closely tied to the entire Tianxing sect. Not to mention ordinary disciples. Even the peak masters couldn't help but discuss it in private. This was where the emotion points were continuously generated. It also gave Yunjing a hint. Besides expanding the ways of obtaining emotion points, if what she did was more closely tied to others, the emotion points she could gain would also last longer. For example, if she happened to save the world or something, then just the follow-up emotion points alone would be enough to keep her emotionally rich for a lifetime. In the sect leader's hall, Zhao Wuji personally summoned Ma Hongyu and his chief disciple Ye Cheng. Zhao Wuji glanced at Ye Cheng. He seemed a bit introverted and kept his head nervously lowered, not daring to meet anyone's gaze. Zhao Wuji narrowed his eyes slightly and said directly,
Hongyu, I believe you've already heard what happened in the discipline hall. Ye Cheng is going to compete against Yunjing. Are you confident?
Ma Hongyu couldn't help but smile.
Sect leader, has that Yunjing even been in the sect for a full month yet?
Zhao Wuji shook his head.
It hasn't even been half a month.
How long since she started studying botany techniques?
Ma Hongyu asked again. Zhao Wuji replied.
I investigated in the library. She exchanged for the manuals yesterday.
So, sect leader, what are you worried about?
Ma Hongyu said calmly.
I am the sect's only 5th rank botanist. Ye Cheng is the most talented disciple I've chosen. He has been with me for 10 years. No matter what, he's at least at the level of a 3rd rank botanist. That Yunjing only started reading the manuals yesterday. Are you telling me that in 10 days, she could reach the level of a 3rd rank botanist?
Zhao Wuji instinctively shook his head.
There you go. Sect leader, there's no need to worry. It is absolutely impossible for Ye Cheng to lose.
Ma Hongyu stated confidently. Hearing this, Zhao Wuji finally felt somewhat relieved. In fact, he already knew the chances of Yunjing winning were near zero. It was only because she was so unpredictable that he couldn't help but worry. Seeing Zhao Wuji was still slightly uneasy, Ma Hongyu added,
Sect leader, if I remember correctly, Yunjing is also a sword cultivator. And supposedly a genius one at that.
Although he wasn't thrilled to admit Yunjing was a genius, Zhao Wuji still nodded.
You could say that.
There it is,
Ma Hongyu said softly.
Swordsmanship is focused on killing and aggression. Sword cultivators usually have too much hostility in their temperament. This fits Yunjing's personality and actions perfectly. But for botany techniques, the most important thing is a calm heart. The more peaceful one's heart is, the better they can communicate with plants and nature, and bring out the full power of botany techniques. Take Ye Cheng for example. He's usually introverted and has a calm mindset. Only people like him can gain the recognition of plants and walk far on the path of a botanist. Someone like Yunjing cannot walk this path.
After this explanation, Zhao Wuji's lingering worries nearly vanished. He smiled and said,
Then, the competition 10 days from now will depend on you two, master and disciple.
Ma Hongyu and Ye Cheng agreed. After the two left, Zhao Wuji narrowed his eyes. So Yunjin really wanted to spare Danxia this time. Heh, guess she finally learned how to behave. Heavenly Sword Peak. Li Yai and the others had already inspected the land where new seedlings were sprouting, and heard from Yue Zhao about Yunjin's small innovation with the technique. No one asked Yunjin the pointless question of whether she had confidence. They all silently worked to lay down array formations, layering them over the spiritual field to conceal it completely. For the next 10 days, the entire Heavenly Sword Peak closed its doors and refused visitors. Aside from Gu Jinghong, who came and went under Yunjin's instructions, everyone else followed Yunjin into seclusion. Yunjin was very busy. In the coming 10 days, she had 2 main goals. 1. To raise her botanist rank. 2. To reach the beginner level of the Azure Lotus Sword technique. She also needed to refine pills to boost her strength quickly. All these tasks had to be done at the same time. None could be left behind. Now that she had Gu Jinghong, he would observe the 5 disciples practice sword techniques, and Yunjin would give them small rewards to keep them motivated to train. On the other hand, Gu Jinghong still swaggered around various spiritual fields, talking to spirit plants as if no one else was around. Disciples from other peaks, upon seeing Gu Jinghong, hesitated for a moment, but pretended not to notice, letting him act crazy. Ma Hongyu merely regarded him as a clown, and only ordered people to monitor him to make sure he didn't cause trouble. Otherwise, he didn't care. After all, could chatting with spirit plants really teach someone botany techniques? Isn't that absurd? Once the 5 disciples had motivation, they practiced even more diligently. On the 5th day, they increased Yunjin's sword technique to proficient. 5 sword intents, formed into a torrent of information, surged into Yunjin's mind. Adding the void-breaking sword intent and the lotus sword intent, that made 7 sword intents. During these 5 days, Yunjin also practiced the 3 sword manuals she exchanged, and reached proficient in all of them. And so, 10 sword intents, complete! After Yunjin comprehended all the sword intents, buzz! In an instant, the entire world spun. When Yunjin opened her eyes, she was no longer in her small bamboo hut, but standing in the middle of a vast ocean. A figure in white was practicing swordsmanship in the sea. At first, his sword moves had no structure, but gradually they became sharper. With a single light swing, waves surged 10,000 feet high, creating a powerful momentum. Those turbulent waves, and the sword wielder, amidst them were etched deeply into Yunjin's eyes. She could feel the mindset of the swordsman with every strike. She could sense the unstoppable force. She could even feel the sea spray on her skin. Majestic and overwhelming. Was this the Azure Lotus Sword technique? Though it shared the word lotus with the Lotus Sword technique, the two were quite different. The Lotus Sword technique was ornate and dazzling, hiding lethal strikes within beauty, making it hard to defend against. But the Azure Lotus Sword intent, it wasn't beautiful. It didn't have any particularly tricky killing moves. It simply relied on sheer power to prevail.
First wave.
The swordsman lightly swung his sword, stirring up a single wave. But he thought it wasn't enough.
Second wave.
The power stacked, and the ocean began to roar. Wave after wave stacked upon one another. By the time it reached the 9th wave, it was as if a tsunami was raging across the sea. This power could already be compared to a natural disaster. When Yunjin thought this was the limit of the Azure Lotus Sword technique, the swordsman suddenly frowned.
Maybe it could.
This still wasn't right. Yunjin perked up, ready to listen carefully. But the scene suddenly vanished. She stared at the familiar small bamboo hut, momentarily dazed. At that moment, she grasped her 11th sword intent. Surging wave sword intent. This was a supreme sword technique that stacked force layer by layer to confront enemies head-on. With this, the Azure Lotus Sword technique was officially at the entry level. But thinking of the swordsman's unfinished words, Yunjin couldn't help but itch with curiosity. Still, she quickly realized. The Azure Lotus Sword technique was only the introductory sword art of the Tian-level Azure Lotus Sword Codex, a secret technique Kunlun sword sect. The 9 waves were the limit of the Azure Lotus Sword technique, but not the limit of the Azure Lotus Sword Codex. If she wanted to continue practicing further, then she would have to go to Kunlun sword sect. Yunjin suppressed the excitement stirred by watching the swordsman practice. There's no rush. Her path was still long, and before her lay mountain after mountain. But as long as she kept climbing, there would surely come a day when she would stand high above, surveying all mountains beneath her feet. Chapter 99. 10 days. After gaining entry level of the Azure Lotus Sword technique, Yunjin checked her panel again. Under Azure Lotus Sword technique, a progress bar appeared. It now showed beginner level, 0%. Below that was a button. Simplification available. He Yunjin decisively clicked to simplify. As expected of a D-level sword technique, she had to spend 500 basic simplifications before getting a satisfactory result. Simplified version of Azure Lotus Sword technique. Swing your sword at least 100 times daily. The more you swing, the faster your proficiency improves. Early in the morning, Yunjin impatiently went outside to test it out. She found an open space and called, "Gun-gun," over. Gun-gun started crashing into trees, then howling like a ghost from the side. Meanwhile, Yunjin began swinging her sword into the air. Si Wanning passed by in a daze. She rubbed her eyes and suddenly became wide awake. Is this some kind of exorcism? She really wanted to ask. But seeing Yunjin chopping wildly at empty air, she suddenly got cold feet.
Emotion points, c50 bon.
Yunjin turned around and saw Si Wanning's terrified face. She cheerfully waved.
Senior sister, hello?
She'd been spotted. Now there was no way to escape. Si Wanning braced herself and walked over. In the end, she couldn't restrain herself and ask.
Little junior sister, are you practicing swordsmanship?
As for Gun-gun, she didn't even bother asking. That beast had already been crazy for several days. Word has it that Xiaojin taught it some kind of chant, something about ramming trees and yelling to become stronger. Sounds ridiculous, right? But its skill proficiency actually increased. Who could you argue with about that? You could only say. Since little junior sister herself is unscientific, then her spirit beast would also be unscientific. Yunjin blinked. The rate of gaining emotion points slowed down recently, and she'd already milked senior brother dry. So now it's your turn, second senior sister. Still unaware of anything strange, Si Wanning couldn't stop herself asking.
Little junior sister, what sword technique are you practicing? It doesn't seem to follow any proper form.
While swinging, Yunjin replied breezily.
Why, it's the Azure Lotus Sword technique. Last night I had a sudden epiphany and managed to gain entry level.
Emotion points till 100.
Ning? The entire sect, even the sect master and peak masters, had failed to comprehend the Azure Lotus Sword technique, and yet little junior sister claims she's achieved it. It's only been a few days. Moreover, wasn't she focused on training her botany cultivation recently?
Does senior sister not believe me?
Yunjin blinked. Si Wanning instinctively nodded, then frantically shook her head. If it were anyone else, of course not. But if it's little junior sister, it didn't seem all that unbelievable after all.
This Azure Lotus Sword technique is also a water element sword manual. It might be useful for your own cultivation. I'll demonstrate it for you.
Yunjin casually sheathed her sword and closed her eyes briefly. When she opened them again, her gaze was surging like waves. A terrifying and unstoppable aura radiated from her body. Si Wanning's lips began to tremble. This wasn't just a simple entry level. This pressure. Little junior sister had clearly already grasped the sword intent of the Azure Lotus Sword technique. Even though she had mentally prepared herself, she still ended up providing 200 emotional points. It's not that she was naive. But that sword intent is not something that can be mastered so easily. Normally, one would have to fully comprehend a sword technique before they could understand its true intent. But little junior sister, her sword technique level clearly wasn't that high. Yet she instantly grasped the intent. She previously did the same for her Lotus Sword technique, directly mastering the sword intent. And now with the D-level Azure Lotus Sword technique, did she once again grasp the sword intent so effortlessly? Both were water element sword techniques. Si Wanning couldn't help but wonder. Although little junior sister has 5 spiritual roots, could it be that her affinity for water was stronger? That might cause an imbalance in the 5 elements. Si Wanning started to worry.
Azure Lotus Sword technique, first wave.
Yunqing shouted, lifting her sword. Waves arose from thin air, layer upon layer, endless and boundless. Gungun was so frightened that he rolled and crawled into a corner to hide. Yunjin pointed to a patch of open ground in the distance, and layer upon layer of waves crashed down, constantly scouring the earth. When the move ended, a huge pit appeared on that poor patch of land. Suan Ningji hurried over to take a look, and quickly did some calculations in her head. Then she came to a conclusion. I'm afraid this move of little junior sisters had already reached the power of a golden core stage cultivator. If this kept up for another month or two, wouldn't little junior sister directly surpass her? Suan Ningji instantly felt terrible. After all, she is still the second senior sister. If she couldn't even beat little junior sister in a fight, where would she put her dignity? Suan Ningji was suddenly struck with an intense sense of crisis. No way. She needs to practice swordsmanship, day and night. If being surpassed by little junior sister was inevitable, then at least let that day come a little later.
Woo 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 woo. Second senior sister, the Azure Lotus Sword technique has a total of 9 layers. I've only learned the first one, and in terms of power, it's still a bit lacking.
Yunjin said very modestly.
I haven't been practicing swordsmanship for long. I still think there's a lot I don't understand. Please guide me, second senior sister.
Suan Ning. Now she finally understood why eldest senior brother was avoiding Yunjin the past few days. Sometimes, this little junior sister could really get under your skin. What did she mean by still lacking in power? She is only at foundation establishment. And yet one move already had the power of golden core stage. What else are you lacking? She even said she hadn't been practicing swordsmanship for long. Who was she trying to provoke? Suan Ning took a deep breath and said very calmly.
My advice is, little junior sister, next time before you strike, there's no need to shout out loud.
Yunjin blinked.
If I don't shout, how will everyone know how powerful this move is?
Suan Ning was completely helpless against this attention seeker. She said a bit dazedly.
You go ahead and practice. I have something else to do. I'll leave first.
Suan Ning turned and walked away, and the Yunjin shouted after her.
Second senior sister, you should practice more too. You can train next to me. That way I can raise my proficiency in the Lotus Sword technique too.
Suan Ning's steps quickened. How infuriating. While she practiced, little junior sister could also improve the Lotus Sword technique. That was pure provocation. That being said, from that afternoon onward, Suan Ning really did drag Yue Zhao along to train sword techniques with Ninjing. As infuriating as she was, if it truly helped little junior sister improve her swordsmanship, then it was worth it. Sword training, pill refining, botany, and if she had time, she also took pills to cultivate. 10 days passed. Yunjin's panel underwent another major update. First, her comprehension in Azure Lotus Sword technique improved a bit. It reached 90% of the entry level. In a few more days, she would reach the proficient level. At that point, she'd be able to master the second wave. According to second senior sister's estimation, the first wave corresponded to early golden core stage. As for the second wave, who knew whether it could go even further? Then there was her cultivation. Yunjin's cultivation could increase by eating. After learning to refine pills, ordinary food became too inefficient. So she directly ate pills. Alternating between foundation establishment pills and rejuvenation pills, her cultivation broke through to mid-foundation establishment in just 10 days. She was only one step away from the late stage. Chapter 100. 3 Evaluations. Moreover, after consuming so many rejuvenation pills, Yunjing also discovered that the meridians in her body expanded quite a bit and became more resilient. It's often said that rejuvenation pills are healing medicines, and under normal circumstances, people who aren't injured wouldn't take them. But Yunjing was different. First, rejuvenation pills came easily to her. Second, as long as she ate food containing spiritual energy, she would increase her cultivation. Rejuvenation pills also contained spiritual energy. In fact, it contained more than foundation establishment pills. To her, rejuvenation pills could likewise increase her cultivation. With that in mind, Yunjing would snack on them like candy whenever she had nothing to do. That's how she accidentally discovered this hidden effect of the rejuvenation pills. Of course, this effect probably wouldn't work for anyone else. Who else would have the nerve to treat rejuvenation pills like candy? Even Huo Lie and Zhao Wuji couldn't manage that. However, Yunjing had a vague idea in her heart. Once she could refine higher-level pills, she could prepare them for her senior brothers and sisters. That way, with their meridians expanded, the amount of spiritual power they could store at the same cultivation level would far surpass their peers. A sect full of prodigies wouldn't just be a dream. Lastly, there was her botany technique. Over the past few days, she ordered Gu Jinghong to grind it out for her, and now, her panel underwent great changes. To become a first-rank botanist, at least 3 botany techniques must reach level 1. Second rank requires level 2, and so on. Currently, all 3 of Yunjin's techniques have been pushed to the peak of level 2, 1 step away from level 3. And according to what she knew, that senior brother Ye Cheng is a third-rank botanist. Because there were only so many botany technique manuals in Tianxing sect, Ye Cheng had also trained in the same 3. Minor cloud and rain technique, soil control technique, and pest extermination finger. He had also cultivated all 3 to level 3. So, in terms of level, she was still slightly behind. However, each of her 3 techniques had undergone a tiny bit of modification. Winning against Ye Cheng wouldn't be difficult. Yunjing fully prepared herself. And the 10-day deadline also arrived. Just as she finished checking her panel, the people Zhao Wuji sent arrived. He was taking this duel very seriously. He personally selected a spiritual field as the site of the competition. This particular field had always been tended by Ye Cheng, and it was the place he was most familiar with. And after reviewing the techniques Ye Cheng was best at, Zhao Wuji personally set the competition tasks. With all this in place, he refused to believe Yunjing could have a chance to turn the tables. Of course, there is a greater possibility of her not being able to perform the most basic techniques and ending up making a huge fool of herself. After the publicity from the previous discipline hall incident, and 10 more days of build-up, this duel had spread by word of mouth, and anyone in the sect wouldn't miss watching the spectacle. The area around the spirit field was already tightly packed. Ye Danxia was also brought over in custody. Her face was pale, but a glimmer of hope still flickered in her eyes. Her life or death depended entirely on the outcome of this match. This time, the 10 peak masters were all present. Even seniors like Elder Min, Sword Elder, and Senior Ning came personally. Zhao Wuji believed that there was absolutely no chance of failure this time, so he boldly arranged seats for everyone. Trying to rebel. Did they think that just one Yunjing could shake his authority? It was the perfect opportunity to let everyone clearly see that he, Zhao Wuji, still held absolute authority in Tianxing sect. Yunjin and Ye Cheng were already standing on opposite sides. Ye Cheng, being introverted, kept his head lowered and was trembling with nervousness.
Why is senior brother Ye so nervous? Could it be that Yunjing is actually somewhat formidable?
You clearly don't understand. Senior brother Ye. That's just how he is. Unless he's with plants, he's always nervous.
Uncle Master Ma personally said that senior brother Ye was born for spiritual plants. His talent in planting even surpasses his own. There's not enough botany manuals in our sect, and level 5 is the limit. If one wants to pursue higher realms, they must go to high-tier sects, super sects, or even holy lands. Uncle Master Ma believes he has no hope. But if senior brother Ye can advance to the 5th rank within 10 years, he might be noticed by high or super tier sects.
As for holy lands, that was simply unimaginable. A mid-tier sect like theirs had only produced one case like Sword Elder in the past several hundred years. Back then, Sword Elder was also incredibly sharp and outstanding in the sect. But what about after Kunlun Sword sect? According to his own words, in the Holy Land, he was completely at the bottom. Surrounded by geniuses, he could barely breathe. In just a few years, his sharpness faded entirely. Eventually, unable to progress, he requested to leave the sect. These past years, he stayed at Tianxing sect, occasionally going out to find promising sword cultivators. So, for those barely qualified to enter a holy land, it might not be the best path. The 4 great holy lands were only for those true monsters who could crush all their peers and stand unrivaled. Speaking of monsters, someone couldn't help glancing at Yunjin. Someone like Yunjin, wasn't she a monster? If she doesn't die in the upcoming life and death battle, she might really be recognized by a holy land someday. Unfortunately, that was for the future. Yunjing had too many mountains to climb. Right now, one stood right before her. Zhao Wuji looked at Yunjing and calmly said,
Within Tianxing sect, the person most talented in botany is Ma Hongyu. So, the content of today's competition will be set by him. Do you have any objections?
Ma Hongyu setting the content of the competition. Is that fair? He is under the sect master, and also Ye Cheng's master. The content he set would definitely favor Ye Cheng. As soon as Zhao Wuji said this, some people began to get nervous, while others got excited. With Yunjing's temperament, she would definitely not let this go. She'd probably cause a scene again. Isn't there another great show to watch? But Yunjing simply smiled and calmly said,
I trust Uncle Master Ma's professionalism.
Zhao Wuji was already prepared for Yunjing to make a fuss and prepared countermeasures to silence her. Instead, she casually agreed. That made Zhao Wuji a little unsettled. He stared at Yunjing suspiciously several times before saying,
In that case, announce the rules.
Ma Hongyu nodded and stepped forward. He said,
For this competition, I selected a spirit field to test 3 secret techniques. This field previously had a batch of medicinal herbs harvested, so it's currently empty. Next, we will plant a batch of Huang-level spiritual herbs, soul-calming fruits. These fruits have very high requirements for soil quality. So first, you must use the soil control technique to cultivate the land into the optimal soil condition for soul-calming fruits. After that, you will each plant the seeds, then use the minor cloud and rain technique to accelerate growth until they sprout. Lastly, I will release a batch of pests that target seedlings to test your mastery of the pest extermination finger. Based on your overall performance in these 3 areas, the final winner will be determined. Do either of you have objections?
Chapter 101. The first evaluation. Soul control technique, minor cloud and rain technique, and pest extermination finger. These 3 were the most practical botany techniques in Tianxing sect. Most botany cultivators use this combination. Even Ma Hongyu himself primarily cultivated these 3. Otherwise, Elder Ming wouldn't have specifically selected these 3 for Yunjing. Ma Hongyu looked at Yunjing and said,
I know that these are also the 3 techniques you exchanged from the manual library. In that case, it shouldn't be considered bullying you, right?
The expressions of the onlookers shifted. It sounded fair, but Yunjing had only studied for 10 days. Whether she had even reached entry level was unknown. Having her compete with Ye Cheng, that was simply striking a stone with an egg. But since the challenge was proposed by Yunjing herself, even if she regretted it now, she could only grit her teeth and carry on.
Of course.
Yunjing smiled slightly.
Uncle Master Ma's arrangement is very fair. I have no objections.
Ye Cheng nervously added.
I have no objections either.
Ma Hongyu nodded. With a wave of his hand, a spirit field that was covered by a barrier fully revealed.
This spirit field has average soil quality. It's only suitable for planting Huang-level plants. This time, the soul-calming fruit was chosen. Every plant has different soil requirements. The 2 of you will each be responsible for half of the area. To prevent interference, I will set up a barrier to block your view of each other. During the entire competition, you will not be able to see the other's progress.
Ma Hongyu moved his hand, and a tall wall rose in the middle of the spirit field, completely blocking the line of sight.
Both areas are exactly the same. Do you need to inspect them?
Ma Hongyu asked. Yunjing and Ye Cheng both shook their heads. Ma Hongyu's expression eased a bit.
Very well, then you may begin.
He truly hadn't tampered with this spirit field. First, with so many people watching, any manipulation carried the risk of being discovered. Second, in a fair competition, Is it even possible for Ye Cheng to lose? He had confidence in his disciple. Yunjing and Ye Cheng each entered one half of the field. Once the partitioning wall stood, they indeed couldn't see each other, nor hear anything from the other side. However, the crowd of onlookers was not affected, and could still clearly see every move they made. As soon as he entered, Ye Cheng became visibly nervous. The soul, calming fruit is a relatively easy spirit plant to grow, with one exception. It had very high requirements for the soil. The soil for cultivating soul, calming fruit had to be repeatedly tilled to ensure every patch was completely loosened. Even slight clumping would affect the plant's growth. His soil control technique is only at level 3, so he could only manipulate a small amount of soil at a time, and had to carefully loosen it, bit by bit. It was a meticulous and physically demanding task. Ye Cheng didn't dare waste a single moment, and immediately got to work. Yunjin looked at the field and didn't move right away. She asked curiously,
Is there a time limit for this round?
Ma Hongyu froze for a moment. He originally didn't plan for a time limit, but since Yunjin asked, it wouldn't hurt to set one. Estimating the time Ye Cheng would need to complete the task, Ma Hongyu said,
Then let's set it as 2 hours.
He had someone light a stick of incense.
This incense burns very slowly. Once it's fully burned, exactly 2 hours will have passed. After that, we'll begin the next round.
The incense was placed between the two contestants. Seeing this, Ye Cheng became even more anxious and sped up his movements. Yunjin looked at the incense and felt a bit troubled. Damn. She really shouldn't have asked that question. 2 hours. The task would take her at most a quarter of an hour. And now she had to wait 2 whole hours. Yunjin couldn't help but sigh. Then she pulled out a sword. Now what? She had nothing else to do anyway. Might as well practice swordsmanship. Everyone watching was wondering if Yunjin had really learned the soil control technique. Then they saw her pull out a sword and start doing some kind of weird ritual dance. Several peak masters exchanged glances, a hint of disappointment flickering in their eyes. They hoped Yunjin might bring some surprise. But now it seemed she just didn't want to offend the sect master too directly, and was using this opportunity as a way to spare Ye Danxia. Sigh. In the end, Tianxing sect still belonged to Zhao Wuji. Whatever rebellious thoughts that arose earlier now quietly faded away. Zhao Wuji watched Yunjin's clown-like display and laughed unrestrainedly. He turned to Lin Yai and said,
With time so tight, why isn't your disciple starting yet? Is it because she doesn't want to?
More like she couldn't. But Lin Ya nodded seriously.
She probably thinks there's still plenty of time.
Zhao Wuji laughed.
Still plenty of time. With such a large piece of land, that must be tilled bit by bit with the soil control technique. Even Ye Cheng is racing against time, yet she thinks there's still time.
Lin Ya sighed.
It seems so.
If they were told in advance that there would be such a large gap in time, based on what he knew of Yunjin, she'd probably have arranged a whole performance segment. He already saw Yunjin's soil control technique, with its tiny innovations, and knew that completing the first round wouldn't take her long. A normal person might choose to go all out from the start, finish preparing the soul quickly and rest afterward. But Lin Ya understood Yunjin well by now. Where's the thrill in going all out from the beginning compared to building suspense first, then making a dramatic turnaround? His disciple is once again putting on the playing dumb to act cool routine. Sigh. Why does such a good girl love showing off so much? Lin Ya looked entirely distressed. Seeing that his words were stubborn while his face betrayed worry, Zhao Wuji assumed Lin Ya was merely putting up a front, and a smile unconsciously appeared on his face. So much for the nerves he felt in the past few days. Turns out, Yunjin was really yielding to him after all. And that was normal. Even if she had 10 times the courage, she wouldn't dare touch Danxia. Zhao Wuji glanced at the other peak masters. At this point, they had all returned to their respectful demeanor, not daring to entertain any improper thoughts. Zhao Wuji was very pleased. In a subtle way, Yunjin helped him reinforce his authority. For that alone, he could allow her to die a more dignified death on the life, or death duel later. Yunjin swung her sword with full concentration. Everyone else thought she had given up in despair. But Sword Elder watched for a long while. His brows alternated between furrowed and relaxed. His entire expression was strangely conflicted. As for Yunjin's technique, there truly was no technique at all. And yet, why did it seem like her casual sword swings carried a trace of some peculiar rhythm? What kind of rhythm? He looked again and again but couldn't figure it out. This disciple does have something special about her. Still, today's challenge is a botany competition. Had she really given up? He didn't think so. Sword Elder remembered the sharp glint in Yunjin's eyes. That day when she said she would walk the path of the invincible. Someone with a heart set on invincibility. How could she give up so easily? Chapter 102. You call this soil control technique. But even the Sword Elder slowly began to doubt his own judgment. Nearly half the time had passed, and Yunjin was still waving her sword. Today wasn't a swordsmanship competition, it was a botany technique assessment. Ye Cheng was diligently working nonstop. And even then he had cultivated less than half of the land. It was clear that the 2-hour time limit was set based on Ye Cheng's ability. Ye Cheng's soil control technique was already at level 3. Yet even with 2 hours he had to race against time. As for Yunjin, all things considered, it had only been 10 days since she obtained the manual. Even if she gained entry level in the same day, could she surpass level 3 in just 10 days? No matter how you looked at it, it seemed impossible. So was this competition really a compromise on Yunjin's part? The Sword Elder kept watching. He still didn't want to believe it, but it seemed he had no choice but to believe. All eyes were fixed on the scene. Since Yunjin entered Tianxing sect, she created too many miracles. Because of this, she became synonymous with miracles. But no matter how miraculous she wasn't omnipotent. After this, perhaps that symbol of miracles would finally fall. Many people felt a sense of defeat in their hearts. If even Yunjin yielded, then what could they possibly do? Tianxing sect really was nothing but a stagnant pool of water. Ma Hongyu glanced calmly at Yunjin, his expression indifferent. He already predicted this situation. A sword cultivator simply couldn't learn botany techniques. Sword cultivators emphasized sharpness and forcefulness. Botany techniques required affection and serenity. How could these two opposite traits exist in the same person? It might not even be necessary to hold the second evaluation. This first round would be enough to decide the outcome, Ma Hongyu said lightly.
Half the time has passed. Please make the most of it.
Upon hearing this, Ye Cheng became even more focused. Yunjin, on the other hand, sighed again. How is there still a whole hour left? Fine. Let's keep practicing swordsmanship. At least she could raise her skill proficiency a bit. The incense continued to burn slowly. Finally, only 1/4 of an hour remained. Yunjin glanced at it. She finally made it through. The time is almost up. Over the course of these 2 hours, she even harvested a considerable amount of emotion points. Yunjin guessed most of those were from negative emotions. Like disappointment, for instance. But as long as they were emotion points, she'd take them all. Next show time. Yunjin stretched lazily and calmly said.
Only 15 minutes left. If I don't start now, I won't make it in time.
Ma Hongyu nearly burst out laughing. She made it sound like starting now could still make a difference. Even a proper level 5 botanist like himself wouldn't dare say they could fully till a field of this size in 15 minutes. Zhao Wuji, treating her like a clown, leisurely brewed a cup of tea and sipped it slowly. Yunjin returned her sword to her storage pouch, then calmly raised her hand into a starting stance. A few disciples who also knew the soul control technique immediately recognized it.
That's the starting stance for the soil control technique.
But what's the use of starting now? No matter what, it's impossible to make it in time.
And besides, how could a sword cultivator possibly know botany techniques? She's probably just pretending.
As the crowd chattered, spiritual energy began to gather. Everyone was stunned. Did Yunjin really manage to gain entry level? Even if she did, it was probably just the most basic level. Compared to Ye Cheng, it's still, just as that thought formed. Spiritual energy surged.
Soul control technique.
Yunjin suddenly shouted. And then, a booming rumble erupted. Her half of the field began to shake like an earth dragon turning over, trembling violently. Even the ground beneath the spectators began to tremble. Oh. What the hell? Soil control technique. This had to be an illusion. Right? Look at Ye Cheng's soil control technique. Carefully tilling one small section at a time. That's what the soil control technique should look like? You should be calling this the earthquake technique instead, right? Yunjin still felt like it wasn't enough. She increased her strength. While doing so, she kept shouting.
Soil control technique activate. Soil control technique ultimate secret. Soil control technique super secret art.
Suanin couldn't help but press her hand to her forehead. She already told Yunjin. There was no need to shout the names out loud. But clearly, Yunjin didn't accept that advice. As Yunjin continued shouting her cringy slogans, the spiritual field surged, as if a dragon were soaring through the earth. The crowd, which was buzzing moments ago, instantly fell silent. Too silent. Ye Cheng was busy tilling soil when suddenly, he sensed something was off. Was the ground beneath him trembling? Was it just his imagination? He looked at Ma Hongyu only to see Ma Hongyu staring blankly in Yunjin's direction, lips trembling, utterly speechless. Ye Cheng's heart tightened. What just happened? He looked at Zhao Wuji, who was glaring at Yunjin. The calm expression from before completely gone. Now looking like he wanted to devour her whole. Ye Cheng grew even more panicked. Yunjin, what on earth did she do? He couldn't see anything from his side of the field. Ye Cheng forced himself to stay calm, and threw himself fully into the tilling. But he couldn't completely calm his thoughts. By the time the 2 hours were up, he still had one small patch of land that hadn't been fully tilled. Ye Cheng wiped the sweat from his forehead. Using the soil control technique continuously was a test of endurance, mental strength, and spiritual power. He had already done his best. As for Yunjin's side, he had no idea what was going on. He couldn't restrain himself and glance over. But all he saw was a tall wall. Until the result was announced, he probably wouldn't know the final outcome. Yunjin also stopped steadily at the exact moment the incense burned out. Her section of land, after repeated overturning, was already loosened to the limit, exactly the soil condition the soul, calming fruit preferred most. Yunjin clapped her hands, her expression calm.
Perfect timing?
The sword elder looked at Yunjin's carefree demeanor, and couldn't help but laugh. This young girl is indeed still the one who declared she would walk the path of invincibility, back on the arena platform. In this competition, everyone thought she deliberately chose to lose. But from the looks of it, she clearly came prepared.
Uncle Master Ma, shall we begin the second round? It's getting dark. I still need to eat dinner. Can we shorten the next round a bit? If every round takes this long, I'll be bored out of my mind.
Ma Hongyu's face turned extremely unpleasant. Planting is a meticulous and delicate task. How could it possibly be rushed? Zhao Wuji's cold voice echoed in his mind.
Ma Hongyu, didn't you say she couldn't possibly learn botany techniques? Didn't you say Ye Cheng was guaranteed to win?
If you judged the first round alone, it was clear Ye Cheng had already lost. Ma Hongyu wiped his cold sweat and hurriedly sent a voice transmission back.
Please rest assured, Sect Master. This was only the first evaluation. I heard she was highly favored by Elder Mean. He must have given her a modified version of the soil control technique, which is why it was so powerful. But even if it was Elder Mean, there's no way he could have also modified the other two techniques, right? Among Ye Cheng's 3 spiritual roots, his water spiritual root is the strongest. The minor cloud and rain technique is also the one he is most familiar with. The second round will be enough to make a comeback.
It better be otherwise.
Zhao Wuji's gloomy voice trailed off and vanished without a trace. Ma Hongyu's heart couldn't help but tighten. He took a deep breath and said,
Now let's begin the second evaluation.
Chapter 103. First wave. The second round began. Ma Hongyu distributed 100 soul-calming fruit seeds each. Then he said,
Here, each of you has 100 soul-calming fruit seeds. All seeds have a certain failure rate. Expecting every single one to sprout is impossible. So in this round, what we're comparing is the number of seeds that sprouted. The higher the number, the higher your score in this round. However, to avoid affecting the competitor's state of mind, the results of the second round will still not be announced to either of you.
Ye Cheng took a deep breath. He still didn't know what that strange tremor in the last round was. The disciples around them were clearly talking about it. But because of the barrier, he couldn't hear anything. Could it be that Yunjing really learned the soil control technique? Even if she did, would everyone react that strongly? With his mind preoccupied, Ye Cheng's face turned even paler. These past years, he always followed Ma Hongyu. Other than planting spiritual herbs, he did nothing else. Compared to the average disciple, his psychological resilience was much weaker. Ma Hongyu knew this, which was why he worked hard to maintain a calm appearance, and temporarily withheld the results. He was afraid it would impact Ye Cheng's performance. But when he glanced at Ye Cheng, he couldn't help but feel a little worried. This child's mental endurance was simply too poor. Who knew if he could perform normally in the upcoming trial? There's no use saying anything more now. It's all up to him.
The second round officially begins.
Ma Hongyu sighed, his face still betraying nothing. He made the announcement, then stepped back outside the barrier. People outside the barrier could hear the activity inside, but Yunjin and Ye Cheng couldn't hear anything from outside. Ye Cheng felt uneasy about this, while Yunjin didn't care. Anyway, her emotion points were still nicely increasing, so she had no reason to worry at all. This round tested the minor cloud and rain technique. Ye Cheng worked hard to compose himself, then cast a spell to summon a small cloud, and began nurturing the seeds.
Among senior brother Ye's 3 spiritual roots, his water spiritual root is the strongest. His minor cloud and rain technique is also the one he's best at.
One of Ye Cheng's junior martial brothers couldn't help saying.
This time, senior brother Ye should win without suspense.
I heard Yunjin has 5 spiritual roots. For cultivators with 5 spiritual roots, each root's strength is quite average. Senior brother Ye has gold, water, and earth roots. Among them, his water attribute is the strongest, followed by gold, and earth is the weakest. So in the soil control technique round, him falling behind a bit is understandable.
Understandable, my ass. That was a sword cultivator, who had trained in botany techniques for a mere 10 days. And she trained her soul control technique to that degree. That's just bizarre. But still, as Ye Cheng's junior brothers, they had to grit their teeth and say this. Otherwise, where would their group's dignity go? Ye Cheng's control over the minor cloud and rain technique was indeed masterful. Under its gentle nourishment, the soil quickly became moist. Ma Hongyu couldn't help but show a satisfied smile. Thankfully, Ye Cheng's state of mind had stabilized. As long as he could perform normally, then this time. Just as he had this thought, Ma Hongyu instinctively glanced over at Yunjin. Ye Danxia was also staring hard at Yunjin. This round of competition is closely tied to her very life. She doesn't want to die. So Yunjin can't win. She absolutely must not win. Everyone already knew how exceptional Ye Cheng was. If he performed well, that was expected and nothing surprising. But Yunjin, she was different. Everyone inexplicably wanted to see her pull off more flashy moves. Under everyone's gaze, Yunjin slowly began casting her spell. The spiritual energy of heaven and earth began to fluctuate once again. Zhao Wuji's expression changed slightly. She had actually gained entry level for the minor cloud and rain technique. He stole a glance at Ma Hongyu, unable to restrain himself. Ma Hongyu's forehead was covered in cold sweat, and he quickly sent a voice transmission.
Sect Master, she has only just barely reached entry level. She absolutely cannot compare to Ye Cheng.
Zhao Wuji could only nod, his eyes fixed tightly on Yunjin. This time, Ye Cheng absolutely must not lose. Otherwise, not only would it be hard to protect Ye Danxia's life, he would also have to return the spiritual fields to the individual peaks. Reduced profits were one issue. The more serious issue was that he would lose one of his methods of control over these people. That would be a massive loss for him. After Yunjin finished casting, a rain cloud also appeared in the sky. Ma Hongyu quickly probed it with his senses, and then let out a small sigh of relief. Fortunately, it was only a level 2 rain cloud, and hadn't yet reached level 3. So she likely couldn't surpass Ye Cheng.
2 minor, cloud, and rain technique.
It's only been 10 days! How did she train so fast?
Wasn't it said that sword cultivators couldn't learn botany techniques?
When did junior sister Yun ever follow common sense?
True.
To reach level 2 in 10 days, Yunxing's talent in botany techniques is simply terrifying. However, senior brother is already at level 3. No matter how talented she is, she's probably going to lose this round.
What a shame. We should have negotiated for a few more days. If she had another 10 days, she might have had a chance to win.
Youthful arrogance and overconfidence.
Yue Zhao listened to these murmurs and let out a sigh. You have no idea how terrifying this minor cloud and rain technique truly is. Yunjing looked at the small rain cloud and clearly seemed dissatisfied. Then she slowly took out a sword. Everyone. Huh? What's going on? Practicing swordsmanship again. Yunjin smiled at the rain cloud in the sky, then said,
You're too small, I'm not satisfied.
Evrim, blaming the rain cloud.
So I'll have to help you out.
Yunjin sighed. She held her sword, and her expression suddenly became incomparably sharp. Help how? Before anyone could react. Suddenly, the surrounding spiritual energy surged violently. Spiritual energy from 10 meters around surged madly toward Yunjin. Even Ye Cheng's rain cloud trembled slightly. His heart jolted, and he quickly casted a stabilizing spell. But the spiritual energy around him still continued flowing toward the other side. Ye Cheng's face changed. What is happening over there with Yunjin again? The raging spiritual energy gathered in front of Yunjin, and formed into a massive blue water dragon. The water dragon was enormous, yet obediently coiled around Yunjin. Clearly, Yunjin's control over spiritual energy had reached a terrifying level. Yunjin looked at the rain cloud and said in a low voice,
Azure Lotus Sword Technique.
Her sword moved. The entire crowd was about to go insane. What did she just say? Azure Lotus Sword Technique. Everyone knew Yunjin had a habit of calling out the names of her moves before using them. But just now, she said Azure Lotus Sword Technique. Sword Elder could no longer control himself. He shot to his feet, his expression incomparably serious as he looked at Yunjin. He gave Yunjin 1 year, and now only half a month has passed. Only half a month, and she had already gained entry to Azure Lotus Sword Technique. Is that even possible? Beneath the coiling blue water dragon, Yunjin pointed her sword toward the rain cloud and lightly said,
First wave?
The water dragon instantly transformed into a towering wave, surging toward the rain cloud in the sky. Chapter 104. Victory secured. The waves surged violently. Even through the barrier, one could feel the overwhelmingly domineering power. Everyone's expressions instantly changed. The Azure Lotus Sword Technique. Is this truly the Azure Lotus Sword Technique? It had been several hundred years since anyone in Tianxing sect managed to learn the Azure Lotus Sword Technique. For a moment, no one dared to be certain. Countless gazes turned to Sword Elder. If anyone could tell whether this was truly the Azure Lotus Sword Technique, it would be him. Sword Elder lifted his head, blinking as he stared at the surging waves. As he watched, even his lips couldn't help but parted slightly. The Azure Lotus Sword Technique. No. This wasn't just the Azure Lotus Sword Technique. This was the Azure Lotus Sword Technique with sword intent. Although he never personally practiced the Azure Lotus Sword Technique, he saw the favored prodigies of Kunlun Sword Sect use it. The Azure Lotus Sword Technique contained a sword intent, the Surging Wave Sword Intent. The Surging Wave Sword Intent is a mid-tier sword intent. During cultivation, the first and second waves were manageable. But if one continued and reached the fourth or fifth wave, its power would stack layer by layer, and in the end, when it suddenly erupted, it would unleash power far beyond the cultivator's own strength. If one reached the highest ninth wave, even a simple stream of spiritual power, after being stacked ninefold, could erupt with a power capable of destroying the heavens and earth. Entering the Azure Lotus Sword Technique was one threshold. Mastering the sword intent was another. Logically, mastering sword intent should be far harder than just entering the technique. But Yunjing, she grasped the sword intent at the same time as entering the technique. This? What kind of monstrous talent is this? Sword Elder's gaze couldn't help but burn with excitement. This time, he may have truly found an exceptional seedling for the sect. Sword Elder couldn't even resist casting a sharp glance at Zhao Wuji. He knew Zhao Wuji was waiting for the life or death duel in 3 months, planning to have Ruan Jun kill Yunjing. Previously, Sword Elder thought this life and death match was something Yunjing insisted on. No matter the outcome, she would have to bear the consequences herself. Now, Sword Elder felt that even if Yunjing was cold, unreasonable, or making a fuss. Zhao Wuji, how old are you already? You actually agreed to it. If this ends up causing the loss of a sword genius in this world, he would drag Zhao Wuji down with him no matter what. Sword Elder looked at Zhao Wuji with gritted teeth. Zhao Wuji wasn't feeling great either. This was the Azure Lotus sword technique. Even among D-level sword techniques, its entry threshold was among the highest, and now a mere foundation establishment disciple casually mastered it. This Yunjing, what kind of monster is she? Zhao Wuji suddenly looked at Lin Ya. Lin Ya's mouth was slightly open, also wearing a look of surprise. Zhao Wuji instantly flew into a rage. How could Lin Ya not know that Yunjing learned the Azure Lotus sword technique? He was pretending. He was still pretending. Utterly outrageous. Among the crowd, Si Wanning looked at Lin Ya and the others, feeling amused. Although she knew in advance that her junior sister mastered the Azure Lotus sword technique, a shock like this couldn't be hers alone. Now, seeing everyone's expressions made her feel quite satisfied. At the very least, it proved her earlier reaction was a perfectly normal response from a normal person. Just as everyone was still immersed in the shock that Yunjing had learned the Azure Lotus sword technique. Suddenly, someone dazedly said,
Wait, doesn't Yunxin's rain cloud seem to be getting bigger?
It can still grow. Everyone looked up, and the mouths that were already hanging open dropped even further. As the tidal wave rushed toward the rain cloud, the cloud began expanding bit by bit, at a speed visible to the naked eye. Originally, Yunjing's cloud was smaller than Ye Cheng's. But with the wave's enhancement, it quickly surpassed Ye Cheng's and continued expanding. By the end, the rain cloud's coverage was 10 times larger than before.
Not bad.
Yunjing finally expressed mild satisfaction. She pointed, and the rain cloud drifted forward, carefully starting to rain. Everyone.
Minor cloud and rain technique is a water element technique, and Yunxin used a water element sword technique. So the two techniques complemented each other. That makes sense.
Many people nodded along. But inside, they were screaming. Makes sense. Makes sense, my ass. They'd cultivated for so many years, but had never heard of a water element technique, being able to enhance the minor cloud and rain technique. Were they fake cultivators all along? Or is this the difference between genius and mediocrity? Yue Zhao looked at the crowd, and faintly felt a sense of superiority. Sigh. This batch of disciples is really lacking. Just this much, and they already seemed mentally unwell. What would happen when they found out Yunjing's minor cloud and rain technique could even enhance water attribute sword techniques in return, and could even generate lightning from water, transforming into the rarest and hardest to cultivate thunder techniques? Would half the sect go mad? The minor cloud and rain technique continued working diligently. Yunjing controlled the rain cloud, moving it back and forth, left and right, ensuring every inch of land was evenly covered. Ye Cheng hadn't even finished the first round of watering, while Yunjing already started the second and third rounds. A strange silence fell over the scene. After a long while, one of Ye Cheng's junior disciples said,
Her rain cloud was forcibly enlarged. It looks big, but the quality of the spiritual rain can't compare to senior brother Ye's.
Right. This round is about whose seeds sprout first. If the rain quality isn't high enough, the seeds won't germinate. So even if
Before he finished, a soft voice sounded.
Yunjin's seeds are starting to sprout.
Everyone turned to look. Ye Cheng had just finished his first round of watering. Meanwhile, Yunjin had completed her third round. As she started her fourth round, a seed slowly showed a tiny sprout. The bud wasn't obvious, looking very delicate, but it did indeed grow. Another wave of awkward silence spread across the field. It had already sprouted. They watched as the little sprouts pushed their way out one by one, impatiently bursting through the soil. In the end, they counted. All 100 seeds sprouted, not a single one left out. 100% germination. What kind of level is this? Everyone looked numbly toward Ma Hongyu. They were all thinking the same thing. Does Ma Hongyu also have this ability? As the person who knew the most about botany techniques in Tianxing sect, Ma Hongyu understood better than anyone else just how earth-shattering what Yunjin did was. Forget about him. Even if they searched through the top-tier botany sects like Xuandan sect and gathered all their best botanists, could any of them pull this off? And even if they could, that person would definitely be a sect treasure, pampered like no other. But Yunjin was just a brand new disciple of a mid-tier sect, having joined less than half a month ago. At this moment, Ma Hongyu only had one thought in his mind. What did Tianxing sect ever do to deserve this? With all her seeds sprouted, Yunjing already secured her victory, but Ye Cheng wasn't done. Feeling bored, Yunjing let her rain cloud continue nurturing the soil. The little sprouts also began growing taller. And in the viewing stands, it was terrifyingly quiet. The peak lords exchanged glances. In addition to the first round, Yunjin had effectively won 2 rounds. Could she really win the bet she made?